Hello and welcome back. This is MC1 Gamer bringing you another battle report for Age of Sigmar. So this is a little bit of a test game, but one of my local friends, Marvin, has a Stormcast Eternal army that he has painted up much nicer than what you'll see here. So this video actually is about 3 or so weeks back. So this was early, maybe about the 5th or 6th game that I had played. And we really wanted to see how tough the Stormcast Eternals were. He really likes them and he wants to play them, and I wanted to test out a kind of an ethereal themed army, but less model count on my army than some of the formation battalions that I had been playing. And something a little bit different that you wouldn't get a chance to play in any other edition of Warhammer, where you could just kind of pick what you want. So I was looking to see also to test out some of the models. So this won't look like necessarily a balanced game, but then again, if you're playing this right, Age of Sigmar is not about balance. It's about scenarios, it's about objectives. So there's no real objective that we put into this game, and it's not a sudden death. But this is just to illustrate, the power, the punch, and maybe some tactics and strategies for things like summoning, movement, and just how some of these units work. So, and again, this is earlier in the evolution of knowledge about how Age of Sigmar works. So some of my more recent battle reports games will illustrate a much more advanced set of mobility and with some more objectives. So by no means is this a remedial game, but it really, if you're watching this, it's really to say, hey, I want to see how tough these Stormcast Eternals are, how they stand up to the vampire counts, and how each of these vampire count units play on the table. So here's our deployment. And my opponent won the deployment roll and was able to also choose the format of the board. So he chose the diagonal one, or the L-shaped one. So he put up what was mostly the starter set. I think he has largely from the starter set. Maybe he has the Relictor as an add-on, and he's added stuff since. And then I put in a similar model count, somewhat similar in terms of wounds. But it's definitely not a fully balanced game. Again, Age of Sigmar not balanced. So his army, he has a Lord Celestant. He's got 2 units of Liberators. He's got 1 Relictor, which kind of has this Lightning Storm ability or Lightning Healing ability. So he can shoot from a distance and do damage, but his main focus is to stay within range of his Celestant, the guy on the Lizard, and heal him back up when he gets hurt. And then he's got these Retributors, I think they're called. They have the 2-handed hammers, and those guys are really, really tough. They could dish a serious amount of hurt. So my army, from left to right, from this point of view at least, from right to left, I have a unit of 4 Spirit Hosts. I just want to see how Spirit Hosts work. They look like they're a little bit more butch than before. Cairn Wraiths, they're a hero now. They're not a unit. A Banshee. You can see that more off to the left here. I have a Mortis Engine, a Terrorgeist, which is, well, actually, that's not a Terrorgeist. I'm using that as a Vampire Lord on a Zombie Dragon. So it's not actually a Terrorgeist. And a 5-strong unit of Hex Wraiths, a Strigoi Ghoul King, and a Black Coach. So just really, similar in model count, but probably a bit more in terms of total wounds. Yeah, here's a closer picture of that. I also put these, the Strigoi Ghoul King and the Hex Wraiths within the forest initially deployed, mainly because I wanted to make sure they got the +1 to their save, because they were fully within a terrain structure if I lost first turn. So here's his prosecutors. He has them off board, and once again, I must stress how the differences in a lot of people's viewpoints of how the rules are. If you don't agree with how I play and with how I interpret the game, that's your right. Play how you want. But I really am not looking for endless debates and arguments and flame wars in the comments about this stuff. So if you don't agree, just play the way you want. I'm going to dictate what my belief is, and I'm going to back it up. I've had these debates in previous videos. It's just not necessary. If you want to talk about it, fine, but let's not do it ad infinitum. Let's not go on and on and on and on. If you have your own viewpoint, you're more than welcome to it, and of course, hey, you could change the rules if you want to as well, but I'm going to defend my belief on how the game works. So in this case, he's got his reserves, the only definition of a reserve, in the game. It's not your entire collection off board or in your your mini case or your storage case or on a shelf or closet. It's what you deploy to the side with a rule that says deploy this to the side. So he's got these deployed to the side prosecutors that are about to come on the board. And I don't have a sideboard with all my summoning stuff. If I summon stuff, it's because I'm using the logical and what I believe is the right way to play it. If I have something deployed, it opens up the War Scroll ability on the unit that then imbues a wizard with the summoning spell that they don't have on their War Scroll to then summon more of that unit. And I believe that also provides for things like higher strategy for summoning. You have to really determine what you deploy in terms of what you want to open up. I know it's different from previous games, guys, but the way the mechanics for War Scrolls work, it ain't an army book, anybody. These aren't army books. They're a series of War Scrolls. So you got to look at it as independent powers on War Scrolls that are active only when you deploy them, not because they're sitting on a shelf or because you have a War Scroll printout in a card deck. In any case, he's now looking to deep strike these guys. So they have been placed to the side because it says on the card, placed to the side. And he wins turn 1. So he first prays. The first thing Lord Celestin does is, says to everybody within 24 inches, you are now immune to battle shock. And then he deploys a little bit too far up front, I believe, these prosecutors. Now, he wants to be within range to shoot at me. And he wants to give me a little bit of a risk in terms of trying to move anything over to try and get it in charge. But really, I think this was a kind of a double-edged sword. He gets to see if I'm going to go and split my army. And if I split my army, that's less troops than his main force has to deal with. The problem is that these are only 3 prosecutors, and if I put a large enough force over here, I can completely overwhelm them. So he goes and he shoots with his, Thor, Odin's son hammers, and knocks my my black coach, which is not quite as powerful or as versatile, I think, as it was in previous 8th edition. Certainly not as it was in a previous edition. It doesn't have like that ward save that it used to have. It just has an armor save, but it used to have that a basic save that it worked against anything. Even mortal wounds it would apply if it transferred over. It doesn't have that in Age of Sigmar. So it doesn't power up quite as strongly. I'll go over that later. But he takes off 1 wound off of my black coach. And then he goes to try and charge, and he fails. He gets 3 total dice combined. There's a lot of mechanics where you only take 2 dice. You use 3 dice, but you only take the 2 best. But with the prosecutors, they can charge with 3 dice added together. I think he was within 10 inches or so, something along those lines. And he rolled a 4, and I just had to take a picture of it because that just goes to show even a gimme is not a gimme. That's why we roll dice, all right? Because you never know what's going to happen. So VC counts turn 1. I go ahead and put the Vampire Lord's special ability Dread Knight to re-roll to hits onto my Hex Wraiths, and then I go ahead and I summon some Hex Wraiths. Now, once again, I've already mapped out exactly my point. I'm making a very strategic case here in terms of how the War Scrolls work. So without going and debating it any further, I only have certain choices. So I decide I want to summon Hex Wraiths, more of them. And I happen to have plenty more of them. And in doing so, there's a mechanic on a lot of summoning that it accelerates if you roll really high. And it does include modifiers. So in this case, I had to roll a 10, I think a 10 or higher. And I don't know if I had any other modifiers, I forget. But I rolled 11, so it didn't matter. So I got 10 Hex Wraiths instead of 5. Yes, they're very powerful. But I'm going to go through a video going down the road where I'm going to talk about how to combat summoning and what some of the mechanics are that kind of should keep people in check with summoning, but a lot of people are forgetting right now. I may even talk about it at the end of this video. So my Strigoi Ghoul King shoots an Arcane Bolt at the prosecutors and is able to dish 1 wound on the prosecutors, and then I start moving things in. Now, I made a mistake here, but it doesn't come into play. I'll just let you know right now. On the left-hand side, you see the big 10-strong unit of Hex Wraiths that I just summoned. They can't move them. Their movement is the fact that they were summoned. They can charge if they're within range of something when it comes to the charge phase, but they can't make a move in the turn that they were summoned. That's a blanket rule for all summoning. And it's unfortunate, but you know, this was again earlier in the game when we were playing. Hey, we're all still probably making lots of mistakes, but we're figuring them out. That's why this series is called Unlocking Age of Sigmar. So please forgive that if you guys have noticed that. I'm sure that there's somebody out there that would. These are great viewers that catch all these little nuances that I don't even catch after watching these things, and I appreciate that. But I'm just pointing that out so you don't have to post and comment about it. But again, like I said, it doesn't come into play. So I move up stuff from this side. I've kind of taken his bait, but I kind of figure if I don't take these guys down, he's gonna retreat them away or move them away, and he's just gonna pluck me. You know, he's just gonna pluck stuff off and do damage with these long range shots from the prosecutor. So I got to finish them off. I've got to put a robust force in here that's going to finish these guys off as quickly as possible. So when you look at these pictures, just ignore that large unit of hex wraiths to the left. They do not come into play. So I move up the black coach. I move everybody within 3 inches. I have to stop. I go ahead and move the rest of my army off to my left, but here, you know, it's from the other vantage point on the right, but towards his main force. So try to get within range, and as you can see, I kept my Vampire Lord on the Zombie Dragon fully within the forest, so he can benefit from the +1 to his saves. And then I issue the charge, and everybody makes it. Now, I want you to keep an eye out on the black coach to the right. He's got his prosecutors spread out with unit integrity, and I've made my charge in. But as the game progresses, that black coach is going to come into play, and I'll show you in a second. First of all, I start out with my Ghoul King, and I kill 2 of his prosecutors. Ghoul King's pretty good in combat, in close combat. He's definitely worthwhile of a choice, especially with certain synergies. But as you can see, he plucked off the wounds, the casualties from the right side first, which strands the unit that has not attacked yet, which is the black coach. Something to keep in mind when you're deploying and when you're removing wounds. When you're charging, and how you position your troops, and when you're using wounds. I mean, when you're removing casualties when you take your wounds. Because if a unit that has not been activated yet in close combat is now further than their pile-in range, which is typically 3 inches. Some units have a really special 6-inch pile-in, but it's 3 inches. Then they don't get a chance to attack, because even though they were within range, now they're not. So there's a strategy there as well. Keep that in mind when you play the game and you're removing casualties. You can definitely minimize the effectiveness of your opponent if they outnumber you. So we move to his attacks. He goes ahead and fights back against the Ghoul King, which is not a bad idea, but I don't think that one prosecutor was ever going to be able to take out the Ghoul King by himself. He does a wound. Then I pile in with the smaller unit of Hex Wraiths, and I'm able to get attacks with all of them, and they wipe out the last prosecutor. Now, as I said, I made a mistake with the big unit of Hex Wraiths on this side of the board here, being able to charge, you know, getting them within charge range with a move. But as you can see, they didn't have an impact on the combat at all. So even though it was a mistake that we figured out later, it didn't contribute at all to the wiping out of the prosecutors. So we go to turn 2, and it's vampire counts, and the mechanic for the black coach is that it's no longer you're rolling lots of dice like you would before based on the Winds of Magic in 8th edition. Now it's how many wizards are within range of the black coach. I think it's 12 inches. And for every number of wizards you have, you roll a die. And if you roll a 6, it gets bumped up one of its stages, which means you're not going to have as many wizards on the board as you had like Winds of Magic dice in 8th edition. So it's going to be a lot slower, the black coach boosting up in its levels. It's got 5 levels now, not the 6 that it had before, and they're okay, but they're not quite as good. So the black coach's, I think, in my eyes, is diminished a little bit in its effectiveness. It's not bad, you know, it's definitely not bad, but it doesn't have, it's going to be slower going. So it's something to consider. If you really like the black coach, there's a place for it in the game, but you know, you really have to like it thematically, and I think we need to further explore and see where it might apply, because you don't take a unit of black coaches, you take one individually. So we go ahead and start off with the turn rolling, and I rolled only 2 dice because I had 2 characters that were wizards that were within range, so I rolled 1 6, and now he's bumped up 1 stage. And then I throw a Mystic Shield on my Mortis Engine, because I want to get my Mortis Engine in there as far close up as I can to his army, because I have a lot of pulsing effects that can do damage. Anything can explode if it's destroyed. But I want it to survive as long as possible. And then I go ahead and summon, again, Spirit Hosts. And it's one of the units I have on the table that I'm able to actually summon. I didn't have with me another model to try and summon maybe a zombie dragon, which would have been awesome. But hey, you know, I don't want to pile on here. It looks like I'm doing okay, and I just wanted to see how some of these mechanics work. So I proxied some of these bat swarms for the summon for the Spirit Hosts, and I throw a couple in there just to be a speed bump and maybe a distraction for my opponent as I bring the rest of the forces up. And this is what the forces look like. I move a lot of this stuff up from the left side, and I'm starting to converge now on him because I've wiped out the prosecutors off to the side. So I get up with the Mortis engine. It makes the charge against his Lord Celestant. I think that he should probably have screened his Lord Celestant with one of these Liberator units. I don't think he should have been up close so he could take the brunt of any charge. I think, you know, this is too valuable of a target for him. It's a strong model, but you don't want to get swarmed. He might have put them like right behind one of these Liberator units, and once they took the blow, he would have been able to either come in or pile in if he was close enough and done some serious damage. But as it is, he's kind of a little off by himself here. So I move in and I'm able to do a couple of wounds onto him. Again, the Lord Celestant, powerful model. I'm not going to say anything negative about the model, but you know, he's not a god. He can't stand in there all by himself. But he strikes back and with amazing power takes 4 wounds off of my... Thank goodness I had that Mystic Shield up. But he takes 4 wounds off of my Mortis engine, so he's now knocking it down pretty considerably, and it's going to be weakened a little bit as it goes. So we go to turn 2 for the Stormcast Eternals, and he does his typical pray, everybody's immune to battle shock, move, and then shoot. So some of his shooting goes against this larger unit to the left of Spirit Hosts. I think this was a mistake. He's not going to kill enough of them to make it matter. He probably should have focus fired on the Mortis engine because, you know, he would have further wounded it, maybe even destroyed it, or taken out maybe one of the characters that were sitting there by themselves, the Cairn Wraith and the Banshee. But I got 4 Spirit Hosts here. I think he was concerned that they would get around the side and hurt his flank. Or swoop around to get some of his heroes in the back, which is what I was going to do. But they're not terribly fast in their movement. And honestly, he wasn't going to do enough effectively. I think he would have been better off shooting the Mortis engine. So he plucks on the other side. He plucks off he manages to kill off one of these Spirit Hosts that I had summoned up. But again, that probably would have killed the Mortis engine because now he piles in with one of these units of. I don't know. I don't think it was. This might have not have been the Liberator unit. This might have been his main character that he attacks with. But either way, I've got now 2 more wounds on the Mortis engine, and with those other wounds that he did with shooting, I probably would have popped, or would have been nearly close to blowing up. So in striking back, I kill off one of his Liberators. And then he dishes back with the other unit of Liberators off to the other side, and now I'm at like 9 wounds down. So I think I've got like 3 wounds left if I remember correctly. It has 12. So again, it would have died right here. That would have been a big move. He might have lost a few things to an explosion, but still, some of the abilities of the Mortis engine haven't been applied yet. So I think this was a miss. But as you can see, the pile-in with his Liberators off to the right here now puts him within range of my Spirit Hosts to pile in, and that's something that progressed in the midst of the combat. So something to consider when you're piling in your phase with units. You should make sure that when you do so that you don't allow another unit to suddenly then enter the combat. It didn't make a difference that where my Spirit Hosts were. Now they're within 3 inches in the combat phase. They are now within range to then join, to act. So I activated them and piled them in, and was only able to do 1 wound on one of the prosecutors, not a big deal. And then we go to turn 3 and roll off, which, by the way, I think is a great mechanic. Everybody, most people love it, but there's a few people who are a vocal minority that have cried about it. And honestly, I got to tell you, I think it's a great mechanic. The angst and wonder and non-certainty of who gets the first turn in any turn, and the potential that you might have to weather the storm for 2 turns of an opponent, and wonder whether or not your strategy might yield the boon of having another turn or the disadvantage of not, when your turn goes, that you have to plan ahead. It's a strategic decision on what you do next. It's not such a, you may only have 4 pages of rules. You have 400 pages probably of war scrolls, but the bottom line is that the game is far more complex than what initial read through conveys. So please, people, play the game before you make judgments. The randomness in each turn, who goes first, and the potential for somebody to go 2 turns in a row or have to miss 2 turns, you know, and wait for your opponent, really means that you have to make some serious decisions to prepare for that fact. And that means you have to think, and it means it's much more like, in terms of a chess type of game, than checkers, which I hear people call, you know, Age of Sigmar. They could even call it worse in some cases. But, you know, if you have to think moves ahead, where's the downside of that? And the randomness sometimes can help. You know, it makes for a lot of fun, and, you know, that's what this game is supposed to be about. So if you're not interested in that mechanic, try it. You know, you probably don't like Age of Sigmar at all, but and I don't know why you're here then watching to this point, but you know what, don't comp this out. You play it, enjoy it. It's a good rule, okay? I love that. It's one of the things I love about bolt action, which takes it even further, because you could have 4 or 5 of your units activated before your opponent. If with the luck of the draw, each guy gets a die, pulls it out of a bag. It could be, you know, you could pull 4 or 5 dice in a row. And the flip side is that your opponent can then get several, you know, activations in a row thereafter. Obviously, it's an advantage, but if you keep getting, you know, back-to-back turns, but eventually your opponent's going to catch up. So it does come into play as an advantage, but it's not as monstrous as most people think. In this case, yes, I got another turn, and I throw up a Mystic Shield on the big 10 model unit of Hex Wraiths, and I throw up a Mystic Shield on my Mortis Engine because I want this thing to survive as long as possible, because it's really getting close to dying, and it really is, you know, it's definitely past its expiration date. It should have been popped by now. I throw the Vampire Lord's ability to enact a rerolls to hit on the big unit of Hex Wraiths, because they're going to hopefully get into the action, and I want them to do some good damage. We get to hand-to-hand combat, and I'm able to take off a Liberator from one side of the Mortis Engine, and then do a wound on another. And then I forget which this ability was. I think that was the pulse ability. I'm not sure exactly, because again, I'm forgetting the specifics of what it does. But then there's something called a Wail of the Damned, and I forget if this is a shooting ability or if it's a command ability that happens in the hero phase. But it is a 9 inches of death. This is why you want to kill the Mortis Engine before it gets close, because when it's at its most powerful, it does a tremendous amount of damage, but the 9 inches apparently is enough regardless, and it catches a lot of him. And so he loses one or another prosecutor, another liberator from this unit. He loses a liberator from the unit on the other side. He takes wounds on all of his guys. Everybody was within 9 inches. Again, focus fire on those big things that kind of get up in your face. Don't spread the shots around unless you really have a purpose to do so. So he takes a few wounds on his characters, and he doesn't lose anything, but again, that adds up. And I healed a wound, I think, because I think it has the residual ability that it can heal. I think die 3 wounds or something like that. So if I remember correctly, yeah, well, it looks like it's still 9 wounds off this guy, so I'm not really sure. But I think that's what happened. In any case, I move up with and I think it must have been in the hero phase or in the shooting phase, because again, it must be in the hero phase that occurred, because I think this is movement here. So I start getting closer in with the rest of these figures, with the heroes and the spirit hosts. Move up both units of Hex Wraiths to go after the big two-handed hammer wielding, I think, what are they called, Retributors. Move up the Black Coach, which I don't think takes any further play in this battle, as well as the Ghoul King, who's really just there right now, I think, just to kind of keep adding rolls to the Black Coach, which again, it means that those guys are effectively stranded. So in one way, those prosecutors sacrificing themselves stranded at least 2 of my units. And then I screech with the Banshee against his Liberator unit, and I wanted to test out how this worked, and liquefied one of his guys. It's not a terribly powerful ability. It's certainly nothing like a Terrorgeist Scream. It's 2 dice against your bravery, but if you can use anything that can reduce the bravery of a unit, you'll get a big benefit, and most units except for like undead or demons will have less than 10 bravery. I mean, they're gonna have like a 6 or a 7. If elites are usually around 7. And you roll dice reasonably well, you're going to start taking off wounds. In this case, it was just pretty funny that she just screeched and this one guy just poof. And so we go with charge. I failed with the big unit that had the kind of the double rerolls to hit and the mystic shield, but the unit of 5 hex wraiths got in on his hammer wielders, the two-handed hammers. So we go to close combat, and I pile in to get around. By the way, I do not agree with the idea that you can slide on successive turn pile-ins. Read the rules, people. Read the rules. It doesn't say anywhere that you can then reposition those guys. It specifically says that if at the beginning of the close combat turn, you can do one of 2 things. You can, if you're within 3 inches, you do not move. I think it's in the move section. You do not move. You cannot move. Doesn't say you can slide, it says you can't move. Okay, pile in is towards the nearest opponent if you're within 3 inches, but if you're within 3 inches and you're already near the nearest opponent, you cannot move. You can't do a second pile in unless it says that you can do a second pile in from some rule. If there are other models in your unit that are not within range of hand-to-hand combat and they get a chance to pile in, they then can pile in. But you don't have that spread out ability where you can suddenly start each turn moving more and more guys around. What I mean is the guys that you moved initially. Okay, this is just a very wide interpretation of that rule. Yet, if you like it, play it. Go and play it. But I'm just saying that that's not what the rule says. If you decide to change it, fine. But there's no sliding around. If you're in combat and the nearest opponent is next to you, you don't slide. Another guy can then enter the combat around the sides. But again, once again, that's the way it reads. That's the way I'm playing it. And if you don't agree with it, play it the way you want. If you like it that way, if you think the slide is, the Age of Sigmar slide, the new dance craze is the way you want to play it, have at it. You knock yourself out. So I then pile in with my, I believe this is an attack back actually from his liberators against his nearest foe, which is the Spirit Hosts. And I attack with the Mortis Engine against his Lord Celestin, who now is up to 5 wounds. I think he has 6, so he's really close. He's teetering. And with some successive attacks, he goes down. So this is, again, he had his Relictor, I think it was, who was going to try and heal him. But I think this is, again, one of those situations where this really powerful hero is just not able to stand in to a massive attacks all by themselves. And probably needed a screening unit or some major support initially before he took a lot of these wounds. The two-handed hammers, the retributors, I think they're called, did exactly what you would expect them to do. They dropped 2 of my hex wraiths and put a wound on another. My vampire lord, I think, came in and removed a couple of bodies from this liberator unit on the other side of my Mortis Engine. And I think I might have done a few more. Oh, he goes ahead and attacks back. I don't think he does any damage. Then I think this might be the final turn of the game. I think what we have here is it's a mop-up game at this point, I think. So what I have a feeling is we are at a point where let me see. Let me take a look if there's another one of these. Nope, that's it. It's a VC victory. So the way it turned out is that the following turn, I think I lost a couple pictures there. My apologies. The following turn, I moved a couple of my heroes in and wiped out his Relictor. We whittled down further his liberators that were on either side of the Mortis Engine. So I think he only had 1 model left, which is, you could see there was, I think that's his, I think it's one of his special characters near where the Spirit Hosts are at the bottom. Now, I call it a VC victory, and here's the reason why. I wiped everything off the table, and we stopped it. I think this is at turn 3 or 4. But it's a pretty good bet that his last remaining guy is probably not going to survive. But I want everybody to understand that when it comes to summoning, there is victory condition implications. I summoned 10 extra models from the Hex Wraiths. I summoned 3 extra models from the Spirit Hosts. That's 13 more models than I started with. That means I have the potential to lose 13 more on the count versus my starting percentage. So I have the potential to go over 100%, which is absolutely the way it works. He lost 90+% of his models, clearly. So that's why this is considered a VC victory. But if it comes to the point where if this was a brutal game and I lost a lot more and the percentages were higher than 100% and he had 1 guy remaining, he'd win the game, even if I had more stuff left on the board because of my summoning. The fact is, though, is that if I lose 100% plus of my models, unless I wipe him out, unless I table him, he can't lose. So it's something to consider when you go hog wild with summoning against or for. If you're a summoning army, or if you're going against a summoning army, remember that fact. That is kind of a stopgap that prevents people from going overboard. A close game is going to favor the person who summons the least or doesn't summon at all, versus the summoner. If you're going to summon, you better go all in on it, or summon strategically in a situation where whatever you're summoning or when you're summoning is a benefit, not just for the sake of summoning. I mean, here in this game, it kind of put me over the top in terms of the, in terms of volume of power and numbers of models, where he just couldn't recover. But in a different type of a game situation, it might very much be against my interests to keep summoning, because even if he had 1 model left, I'd lose. So look at the math of that, of how that works. I think it's one of those things that a lot of people are not considering when they're thinking about what's going on in the summoning game. The summoning game is not perfect, and there's still some gray areas that a lot of people are debating. But the truth is, if you go too far, you're almost giving away the victory as a result. And in some cases, the victory conditions don't apply. They're objectives. So having just masses of troops or bringing in new troops through the summoning mechanic may help you in that regard, but they also may not. It is situational. I know a lot of people think, well, how does it hurt to have 10 or 15 or 20 or 50 extra models that I bring on the table that I didn't have before? But if, again, you still have to achieve the goals in a mission, or you still have to have the percentage advantage at the very end for a minor victory. A major victory, obviously, is a wipeout of your opponent. But if you don't have that, then you basically given the game away. So play with that concept. I think that it's a very underlooked and undervalued component of the summoning game that could and should give pause to anybody who wants to use it. You definitely need to calculate how much you use. There's an effectiveness to summon maybe better creatures that are fewer in number in this regard, but then again, there's definitely a merit to summoning units, large volumes of units, where you get that accelerated combat effectiveness of units, like for instance zombies and skeletons and some skavens and others. So with that, again, it was a VC victory. We had called it early enough because, again, this guy wasn't fast enough. This last remaining guy wasn't fast enough to go and get away from the rest of my units. But the goal was not crush your opponent or try to have a balanced game. It was, let's have in a game, see how these guys stack up, and let's play with some of the mechanics of some of these units and see how they work. I hope you enjoyed it, and there's much more to come. And